This week we'll be setting up our image planes and aligning our scenes to our concept art. To do this, we'll adjust the grid and camera settings, and we'll discuss some of the ways we deal with imperfect perspective in our concept art. We'll also be establishing our scene scale. Next, we'll use NURBS curves to create guidelines to help us visualize our concept art in three-dimensional space. We'll cover the use of live surfaces and instancing to help us create these curves. With our curves set up, we'll begin polymodeling. We'll create and edit geometry using several of Maya's tools and deformers. We'll also set up some keyframe animation to help pose our models to match our concepts. Finally, we'll go over some hierarchy setup and other scene organization using shaders and selection sets. So without further ado, let's hop into Maya. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is bring in an image plane of our concept art. And since our concept art is usually drawn in perspective, we're going to want to use a perspective camera, but we don't necessarily want to use the default new scene perspective camera that Maya creates. So I'm going to actually create a new camera especially for our concept art, and how I do that is come up to Panels, Perspective, New, and let's rename that Concept Cam. So how we get the image plane in here is we go up to View, Image Plane, Import Image, and this normally points me to source images. I'm not sure why it keeps pointing me to scenes, but I just go up a directory, go to source images, and select our SpaceVet JPEG. This comes in really bright, and this is really going to hurt my eyes if I'm looking at it for long periods of time, but luckily there's some options on the image plane that we can adjust to make this a little easier for us. So how we get to that is go to Concept Cam and open the attribute editor. I usually keep it open on tab over here. You can see these buttons up here. The hotkey to open it is Control A. So right now we're on the camera shape, so we're going to want to go over to the image plane shape node, and you can see we have some options here that we can adjust. Now the first thing to get rid of this harsh white of the background is we can knock down the color gain. Now I don't want to go too far because the grid lines start to disappear when I get about halfway. So I'm going to just go to like there, so I can still clearly see the grid lines, I can clearly see the line art. Now the other thing we're going to want to adjust is the alpha gain, because we're going to want to overlay this image over our model to make sure everything's lined up properly. So if I bring the alpha gain down, you can see we start to see the background. I'm going to leave this at 0.5. So now that we have an image plane in here, we're going to want to align our scene to this image. You can see we have this perspective grid in Maya when we open the scene, and to turn it on and off we can click up here to toggle it on and off. If we toggle it off, we can see that this image has some perspective drawn into it. I know it's not going to be perfect because it's something that I just eyeballed and drew, and unless the concept artist worked from a model, the perspective usually isn't perfect on a drawing. But we're going to do the best we can to line this up. So let me bring the grid back, and we're going to want to align these grid lines with features on our image here. But the problem is that the grid really doesn't cover the whole image, and if we zoom in so the grid does cover the whole image, you can see we have less information on the grid to line up with. So what we're going to want to do is increase the size of this grid, and how I do that is go up to Display, Grid, check the option box. So right now the grid is 12 units. Why it's 12 and not 10, I have no idea, but we're going to make it for now 100 and hit apply. And now you can see we have plenty of information to line this mesh up. Now the first step I usually take when I do this is decide where the center of my model is going to be and line it up with the origin. So I want to line up kind of the center console inside of the car. So that's kind of like the center point of this main body of the car. The next step I usually take is deciding what point on this model I want the ground plane to be on. I kind of want to align the ground plane for now with these two sticks with the wings on them that come out of the front of the car. So I'm going to want this dark line that represents the z-axis to be at an equal distance between these two sticks. So I'll move the grid down a bit. And you can see now that we have about 3 units in between. The next step is going to kind of be changing the pitch of this grid so the lines that go along the x-axis line up with this image a little better. So if you kind of click and roll forward here, you can see what that's doing here. You're going to have to kind of move things around. So now if I look at this line here, I can line it up with the grid a little better. And let's zoom in a little bit so we can hit the edges of these sticks out front. I'm pretty happy with how this is looking so far. The front fenders are more or less aligned. These the front grille seems aligned. These two sticks are aligned. You can already see there's some problems though, like the front of this stick is sticking out a little further than this stick. This type of thing is going to happen when you're working from something that was hand drawn. It's never going to be 100% perfect. Another thing you might have to mess with when you're trying to align your concept art to the grid is the focal length of the camera. So if we click on concept cam shape here, you can see we have focal length here is 35. Now, how I think of this is the higher the focal length gets, the more orthographic the image is, which means there's just less perspective in it. If we go down to something like 12, you can see how extreme this perspective is. Let's go back to 35 for a moment. Now, 35 is what Maya defaults to, which is kind of where I start. And if things aren't lining up perfectly, I'll mess with this number. If your image is a little more orthographic and it doesn't have that 2-point perspective look, maybe it only has like a 1-point perspective, you might want to increase this. If I increase this to like 55, you can see that there's a lot less perspective in this image now. But you can see I've gone too far for my concept, because now the alignment of these wings and these wings back here is completely off. If I go back to 35, it's a little hard to see this, but you can see there's less discrepancy in between the grid lines and where my the features of my drawing are lining up. So now that I've got the grid lines aligned to my image the way I want, we're going to have to adjust the scale of this scene. So Maya's units are in centimeters, and if you create a cube, you can see a representation of 1 cubic centimeter. And unless I'm making this a small Hot Wheel toy, this isn't going to work. One of the ways that concept artists usually convey scale is to bring a human in. So if I go to import and import this base man, which represents a 6-foot human, go to my perspective cam, you can see how tall a 6-foot human is. Now let me go back to my concept cam. So the easiest way that I'd like to do this is throw this into a group by hitting Control G, and then we can scale the group up. Let me just scale this up to something that feels about right. Let's go to about 16. So now you can see another problem is now our grid is almost completely solid. So let's go adjust some options in the grid again. I want the length of it to be maybe 500 units so we get a little more coverage. But I want grid lines maybe let's do every 50 centimeters. So that's a little more reasonable. And now our units on our grid are about 50 centimeters. You're going to want to adjust this. If you're making like a huge battleship, you're going to want to adjust this to be different. The important thing to remember is that Maya's units are centimeters, and we're going to want to model in real world scale. Let me close this. One of the things I have open constantly when working in Maya or modeling in Maya is conversion. So, living in America, I'm more familiar with imperial system. So, I constantly need to know what how many centimeters equal a foot and how many centimeters equal an inch. So, in my case, I actually have kind of a special circumstance because I base my drawing off of this Corvette. So I can look up some facts about the Corvette, and I know that the length of it is 185.2 inches, and I know that the width is 69 inches. Now, if you're not working with something that you can find this information out about, you can just kind of eyeball it to scale with this. But in my case, I'm going to actually create a cube, and we'll actually 185.2. So 470.4. I'll just do 470. And then let's go back here with this 69 inches. So that'll be 175.26. Let's just leave it at 175. So you can see I've gotten pretty close. If we hit 4 on here, you can see that I've gotten the length and width of this pretty close. Let me actually scale this up a little more. So now I've kind of got a scale on my image plane and my scene that I'm happy with. We move this guy. I like to keep this guy in the scene, so I'll just move him off to the side, and I'll go ahead and delete this cube. And now would be a great time to save. So now that we have the camera all aligned, one of the important things we need to do is actually lock the camera into place. I can't tell you how many times I've gone over to from perspective and into my concept cam and accidentally moved it. And aligning it back by hand is damn near impossible. So luckily, if you use the bracket keys on your keyboard, you can go back through your camera moves. You can also use Alt-Z as kind of your undo for your camera moves. But what we want to do is grab the camera and grab the translate and rotate, right click, and lock selected. That way, if you're in this camera and you try to orbit or pan around, you can't mess anything up. So this will always remain locked this way. One of the tools I like to use, especially when modeling something like a car, is to set up guidelines with NURBS curves. So, say I wanted to create a curve that represents the hard edge of this body line here. Now, if I go to create curve tools, CV curve tool, and I start to just draw something out following the drawing, just something loose to give an example. And if I go to my perspective view, you can see that the CV curve tool has drawn this curve along the ground plane, or the ZX plane. And for the side of this car, it's going to be more appropriate that we draw in the ZY plane. So in order to get this tool to behave in this way, I'm going to have to help it out a little bit. So what I do is create a plane, scale it way up. Let's take out the divisions because we don't need them. And now if I rotate this by -90, we've effectively created a ZY plane on which to draw. So if I go back to my concept cam, I'm going to want to make sure to scale up that so I have enough coverage. Now if we make this plane live, which is this magnet up here, every point that we draw on this curve is going to stick to the side of that plane. And so we should have a curve that runs along the ZY axis. So let me go ahead and draw that out. Actually, I'm going to turn the ground plane off because I don't need to see it for this. So let me just draw along this curve. And when I want to make a harsher transition, I just click a couple times and it creates kind of a knot in the curve. So now when I hit enter, we've got this curve, and if we go to perspective view, you can see that it's vertical. It's along that vertical axis the way we want it to be. But there's a problem. We've drawn it along the center, which should be the center line of the car. So how I fix this is, let me turn this grid back off again. Change the pivot by hitting the insert key. Hold the C key to curve snap and snap to the beginning of the curve. And so we've created our pivot there. Now, if I go back to concept cam, I want to drag it to where the center point of the car would be, which is this point on the front. And then, if I stop the plane from being live, now when I drag along these two axes, I'm actually dragging it in space. So let's go back to perspective, and now you can see that the curve is actually off of the central axis now. And when we look at the concept, so since we drew in perspective on this plane, things are a little off. So I'm going to just scale it down this way. And that kind of gets it back to where it needs to be. So to create the other side, since this is a symmetrical object, what I'm going to do is I want to create an instance of this, and I'll explain why in a moment. But how I create an instance is go to duplicate special, change this from copy to instance, hit apply, and now I can move this curve to the other side of the car. Now this curve is lined up with the other side of the car, but it doesn't match. And that's because if we look at the Corvette, the fenders actually flare out in different directions. So we're going to want to recreate that. And we made this an instance because I can now grab this, I can now grab these control vertices and move them on both curves. The problem is I need these to go in opposite directions. So I'll take this and scale it by -1. And now if I grab control vertices and move them, you can see that they go in opposite directions. So I can effectively grab these and match the curve on this side. But you can see where that is problematic because now we've lost this curve on this side. So what I really like to do is grab these control vertices and drag them along the XY axis until they align from both sides. So now if I go to perspective mode, you can see something that kind of better represents the curvature of the car. Now this is a little messy, So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. So now I've got some curvature that I'm kind of digging a little bit. But there's another problem. If we go and hit our switch cam and frame up on this, actually, one thing to note, when you do use switch cam, you almost always have to adjust the clipping planes on cameras. And how you do that is go to the options for the camera, and let's make this, let's leave it at 1 centimeter and make this I usually just add 2 or 3 zeros to that. But what you can see is going on here is the y-axis here no longer represents our center line for this piece. So we're going to have to move everything. So how I do that is Control G, and then if I center the pivot, move it over to, let me turn the grid on, move it over to this axis by holding the X key. And now let's go back to our concept cam and see what's going on here. So you can see what happened here. Because I arbitrarily picked this point to be the center line, it wasn't actually accurate. And that's one of the reasons I picked these lines, is that they're very defined by their edges. But what we're going to have to do is kind of move this along the axis until it somewhat lines up. And you can see it's not going to be perfect. But we have now a closer representation of these shapes. And now what we can do is go and actually refine these shapes. So I'm pretty happy with the way these curves look. So now that we have those kind of in place, we can work on our center line. I want to find my center line, and I want it to look good. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back and make this live again. And we are going to create an EP curve tool, since this is essentially a straight line. And what I'm going to do is curve snap it to here, and then click on the plane and it'll snap to the plane. Now if I go back to switch cam, and let me actually delete these two control vertices so we just have a single curve. I want it to kind of follow that curvature again. So I'll go back to concept and I'll just move it forward. So you can see that the actual center point of the front of this hood should be way out here. So the drawing is, surprise, wrong. Now, just for the sake of being clean with this, I'm going to create another curve. Goes along here and goes here, just so we have a nice clean curve. Delete that curve. And now since I created this curve and the pivot is at the origin, I can duplicate it and scale it by -1. Now if we go to perspective, we can see the outline of our car kind of taking shape. And so I'll continue through this process a little bit. So now let's create our actual center line. This is still live, so we can, let's use the CV curve tool again. And then I'll curve snap here. Kind of draw along here. Kind of imagine where the center line would be. So now let's look at perspective view and refine. One of the things I find valuable when doing cars is imagining what it looks like without the cowl on the hood. And I'm going to do the same thing here, where I change the pivot. And we could even curve snap. Because I want to define that window. We can even curve snap. Now let's create another instance, and let's do -1. Let's have these control vertices on here. And you can kind of move these over to where they need to be. Let's see how it looks in perspective. It's kind of cool. We're starting to get these cool sweeping lines. So now I'm pretty happy with my guide curves. We don't really need to take them any further than this, and because we can do the rest of our exploration with polygons. So the first thing I want to do is kind of create the plane of this hood without the cowl and without the fenders. The way I usually work when creating shapes like this is creating a shape and then extruding. So if I go to my switch cam and go to the side view here, it's basically this line that continues down here. So let's go to create polygon tool, and we can curve snap along here. And you can see I'm just trying to space them out pretty evenly. Press enter to exit the tool. And now we have this ugly face. That's an N-gon, but we're only temporarily using it because we just want to extrude this edge. So I've got this edge selected, and I'm going to hit the extrude key and then hit the W key to move them. And we're going to, while we're in this edge component selection, we're going to change the pivot by hitting the insert key, holding down V, middle mouse clicking, and pressing insert again. And now we've got this corner is our pivot. Now if I try to curve snap this, you can see the entire edge collapsed into one point, and that's not what we want. So what we're going to have to do is come to the tool settings here for the move tool and adjust the move snap settings and turn on retain component spacing. So now if we curve snap this thing, it slides along that edge. Now we kind of are getting the shape we want of that hood, but there's a problem. It's much higher than where the bottom of the window is. So what we're going to need to do is use a lattice. Now the lattice is a really powerful tool, and what it basically does is creates a cage around your selection. As you can see here, it's pretty much a straight line because we just extruded. But you can define how many divisions this cage has, and in our case we only just want the one, because we're going to simply move this down this way. And now you can see we have kind of a more complicated shape. Let's go ahead and delete that face because we don't need it anymore. You'll notice the lattice is kind of stuck around here, and I usually get rid of the lattice when I'm done using it by deleting history. So I want to create an instance of this piece. Let's go over here, duplicate special, let's reset it, change it to instance, hit apply, and then let's scale that to -1 in X. So now we've kind of created that surface of the hood there in a very basic way. And if I go back to the concept cam and go to form mode, you can see where we can start cutting in these curves of the fender. So let's use the multi-cut tool. So what I'm going to do is I'll start on this side, sort of draw this shape out here, and it actually lines up pretty well. So what I will then do is grab some of these vertices and start to curve snap them to my curve. So now if we go back to our switch cam, you can see that we've created the curvature of the hood. One of the other things we need to create here is the actual curvature of the side. So let's go ahead and extrude that and just go straight down with it. And then we can, let's actually just flatten it out. So now I can move here and drag this down, and we're going to use another lattice here to kind of get us this this shape of the fender here. So let's go to lattice, And change this to 2. Go to lattice point. And then we'll kind of just move this along these 2 axes up to there. And that kind of gives us the basic shape of that fender there. However, there is a fair amount of curvature to this, so if we follow this door panel down like that way, right? And then we can add a couple divisions. Let's go ahead and delete history. So let's add a couple divisions here. Let's make 2. And as I start to drag this out, you can see that we're following the curvature here a bit more accurately. But if we go to our switch cam, this front curvature here is getting a little too extreme. So what we're going to do in this case is use another lattice. And I'll turn this to 2. Lattice this in. And then we look at this front fender here. Just kind of bring that curvature back in here. I'm feeling like this is a little too straight. And delete history to get rid of that lattice. What I'd like to do is maintain my curvature up here, but kind of improve the curvature of this area here. So what we could do is another lattice. Actually, let's just do these and convert it to vertices. And then we can do another lattice here. And instead of doing 2, let's do 5 here, this way. I always have to kind of play with the lattice. Let's look at now we're getting a little closer. So I'm going to make these doors in a very similar way. And if we go to perspective again, let's go ahead and extrude and go straight back. And let's insert, point snap the pivot, and we'll actually curve snap to this point here. So we're starting to lose that curvature again, so let's do another lattice. Set this to 2. And just eyeball that so it's straight. Excellent. I'm going to actually use the auto crease on this and see what it does. Okay, it's made that hard. Let's make this one hard as well. I'm going to see what these shapes look like. So let's continue with that process down the rest of the car body. Basically just extruding the edge, changing the pivot point, and curve snapping to our guide curves. And repeat. So now I'm going to have to go in and correct the curvature of the quarter panel. And what I'm going to do here is actually select these individual edges and lattice each one of them. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to affect each one kind of individually, since they're all going to have a different adjustment that needs to be made. So now I'm getting kind of a body shape that I'm happy with. I'm going to grab these verts in the center and grid snap them. See, so now we need to change back our move snap settings to not retain component spacing. And change this to world mode so we can snap it to the center again. Let's actually grab this and kind of recreate that angle of the fender a bit. So I'm pretty happy with this shape. So let me go ahead and delete history. And now what I'm going to do is actually close this mesh up, because I'm going to be sculpting on it in ZBrush in the next lesson. So first I'll grab this edge here, extrude it, and snap it to the center. And then I'll fix this vert on the front and this vert on the back to kind of match that angle. I'll delete my instance and do a proper mirror over -X. Go ahead and hit apply. And then I'm going to add some edge loops that will kind of meet up with that edge. So I'll use the multi-cut tool and hold shift to make sure I'm at the same percentage on both sides. And then I'll grab these edges here and fill hole and use multi-cut to connect these edge loops. So then I'll grab this edge and split and do multi so we can line up with the two edge loops on the sides. And then if you actually select n-gons, and you can go to mesh and hit triangulate and quadrangulate, and sometimes it doesn't work, but it usually behaves in a way that it will connect your topology. So since I'm going to be working in ZBrush, I'm going to add some divisions to the mesh just to kind of give it more even topology. And then I'll go ahead and I'll run auto crease, and let's harden these edges as well. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with the body so far. So let me just name this real quick. And then I'll delete the history and hide it for now. So the glass is a simpler shape. It's almost like a spherical shape, but instead of using a polysphere, I'm going to actually use a cube and smooth it a couple times. So I'll give it 3 divisions. And then I'll kind of align it with my guide curves and start to scale it. We'll go to the side view and scale it in that direction as well. And I'm just going to grab the back half of it and just sort of extrude it back. And I'll add some divisions and kind of adjust, and then I'll just delete the bottom half of it so we get that kind of dome shape. And then I'm just going to lattice it and kind of try and line everything up with my guide curves. And I'll just move this all the way out the back. Kind of adjust the curvature of it. So now I can see how it's interacting with the body, and need to extrude that edge down because we did have a gap. And then I'll just kind of move these verts in a little bit and make sure they align with the rest of the body. So now, like the rest of the body, I'm going to actually close this shape up. I'm going to grab these edges and use the bridge tool. Add a division, and then grab these two edges and fill hole. And then just connect with the multi-cut tool. And add some more divisions. You notice sometimes that I will actually go into the channel box and enter the divisions, and other times I will just continue to grab edges and add divisions by hitting the G key. And it's really whatever gets you there faster. So let's go ahead and auto crease this. And if we unhide our car body, it's starting to look pretty good. Let's create this cowl in a similar way. So, hit cube. Let's run a smooth. Let's just do 2 divisions this time since it's smaller. And in this case, I'm actually going to change the pivot point to the top and scale it out. So here's a problem. I want to see the line work on my drawing, but I can't because the mesh is here. So what we need to do now is go back to this camera, which is in group 1. We can actually unparent it now. There's a couple things we need to do to it, really. The first is in the attribute editor for the image plane. We want to change the depth to, let's say, 10. What that does is brings the image plane closer to camera. And since we had the alpha gain adjusted, which we can adjust even more, really, now see our line work appearing on the model. So what's interesting about this then is now I can see that this window shape needs a little bit more work. So if I throw a lattice on there and maybe change the divisions here, let's go grab those lattice points. Actually, when we go to our perspective, we know that it matches the curve from the front more or less. Move that back and move this bottom part forward a little bit so it matches a little better. So what we're going to want to do is, from our concept cam, we're going to need to scale the bottom out a little more. So here's the other thing we need to do. Let me delete the history on this. Undo that. We need to take our concept cam. We're going to want to put it on a layer. And we'll rename this layer CNCPT and save it. And now we can toggle on and off and see what our model's looking like. Something that's interesting about this piece, you can see that it is now poking out of the bottom here. So we don't want it to do that. I kind of like how it intersected there. But maybe the front just needs to be scaled out. Match the curvature. While the back gets scaled in a bit more. Maybe this could even be scaled in a bit more too. You can see how this complex curvature of the shape is happening now. Now for this piece, let's go back to our concept cam. Toggle the concept layer on. It's really a lot thinner. Let's add another smooth actually. One of the good things about keeping history around sometimes is adding those smooths. Let's go back to perspective. It's kind of showing up as like a little too round for me. So what I'm gonna do is do another lattice on it. Change this to 2 and change this to 3. It's never the right one the first time you pick it. That's just one of the rules of using lattices. That's kind of a shape that I like a bit better. And let's delete history. We can extrude this back. Oh, you see that too? Alright, so let's delete these faces and close the shape up. Do it exact same way as we did the glass. Bridge tool, add divisions. If you actually go to object mode and hit fill hole, it will fill all the holes in the mesh. So that's what I did there. And then just connecting edges with the multi-cut tool. And that's all she wrote with that. Let's take a look at our concept cam again. And actually, I think that this piece, we want that curvature to be a little different back there. So let me grab the lattice again. And let's grab these 4 points back here. Actually, let's change it. So another thing I will do often with lattices is use soft selection. So I've got those back 4 points. And if you hit B, it'll turn on soft select, and you kind of have to drag and get the fall off right. So I don't want the fall off to go past this point here. So I'm going to kind of do it that way. And if we drag this out, let's turn the concept back on. And we want to match that curve there. So let's go back to our switch cam. And now we'll just go ahead and turn soft select off and just adjust it accordingly. And while we're working on this, we may as well also another lattice. Let's do 2, 3 there, and let's grab these 2 points back here and just make them match the same kind of shape. So one more thing I want to cover about the image plane. We can delete this first group. If we go back to the concept cam and go to the image plane, there's an option in image plane shape 1. In all views or looking through camera. So when we go to our perspective, you'll notice the image plane is here, but we don't always want that. So I'm going to change this to looking through camera, and I'm actually going to hide this turn off cameras so we don't see the camera. And now we've got kind of this unencumbered view of the model, but when we go back to our concept cam, then we see it there and we can turn it on and off through the layer. Actually also going to turn this to reference so we can no longer select the image plane in the viewport. So we've named this body main. Let's name this cowl, and let's name this windshield. And we'll put these in a group. Call them guides. And this group as well. Delete that group. So now we can also put this on a layer. Call this guide curves. And shut that off. So now we have like a basic blocking of the body of our ship. So you notice this section of the body back here kind of goes off into space, and that's because this mesh is really more of the form of the body. And when we do our sculpting in ZBrush and retopologizing, we will account for that kind of cut back there. So let's go ahead and create some of our other shapes. These we can be a little more specific about because we're not going to be sculpting on them. So first of all, let's create these wings in the back. And if I point snap over here to this corner, we kind of get the idea of where they are in space. So let's switch back to perspective, go to the side view, and just move these verts around, kind of get the basic shape going. And then I'll just scale these in really thin and try and match that angle. They have this little notch on the front here, so I can pull this edge forward a bit. One of the interesting things about seeing your shapes in 3D for the first time is they're often different than you expect when you draw them. This wing, for example, is a lot longer than I expected it to be. Let's actually Control G, make a group, Control D, and on X do -1 scale. And let's see how close we got with this. Okay. So here's what's going on. Let's move both of these forward a bit. We'll switch the manipulator to object mode, and we can kind of work on these things at the same time. Let's grab the verts on this. Since these aren't instances, it's not going to be quite the same. But we can still add. So you can see that there's a difference here, but we're just going to have to kind of split the difference. Or maybe it's the angle. It's the angle. Move forward a little bit. Let's move these verts back so it's not so extreme. I want to go over something that's kind of important about hierarchies. So these objects that are in the center, I'm going to group them together and call this group C body null. And I like to use this null, something I picked up from work. And since these are just blocking, we'll just leave them named as they are. But I'm pretty much only going to work on this side of the model. And I've mirrored this piece over to make sure it looks right from right to left. But on pieces like this, these engines, we're going to want to only build this side and then mirror it over afterward. So our model hierarchy is going to be center, right, and left. And let me just group this, and we'll call our overall group space vet. And let's just call this C space vet null, since it's really not just the body, it's everything. Now for these, let's freeze the transforms on this group, which froze it on the object too. Great. Let's delete that. And we'll call this L space vet null. Actually, lift this out of that group. Delete that. G. We'll call this L space vet null. L rear wing. So I wanted to organize the hierarchy in such a way where we have our main asset, all the stuff in the center, and all the stuff on the left. And that way we can mirror the stuff on the left over later and quickly replace the names. Let's work on these front pieces. So I'm just gonna point snap to get this cylinder into the kind of right area, rotate it and scale it a bit, get it the right shape. Let me just double check the positioning here. Looks about right. And let me scale it up, and then to make the smaller stick, we'll just duplicate it and scale it down. I'll grab these faces and extrude to make this thicker area. now we'll make the wing. Just make a cube. And we'll point snap it over here to get it in position. And then let's go to the front view and then kind of position it. So let's just do like a 45-degree angle. And then I can snap it to the center point of the cylinder. And then I guess I'll just move some verts around here. And then I'll actually point snap the pivot of that thing in case I need to rotate it to the center of the cylinder there. And then if we group it and mirror it to the other side, the angle actually looks pretty good, so I think I'm just going to leave it. Just position it a little bit. Cool, so just delete that other side and let's rename these pieces really quickly. And we'll just rip them out of this group and put them in the left side and delete the group. So now let's build these engines on the side, or thrusters, and just scale up the cylinder, kind of get it into position. That's a perspective view. Make sure it's kind of in the right spot. Looks pretty close. Just put it into place there. Looks about right. So I'm gonna grab these edges on the outside here, and we'll use the bevel tool. But we're gonna want to make that curved fillet. So I'll change the fraction and add some segments. That looks about right. So it looks like this opening's about 6 faces, but I'd rather build this thing on axis, so I'm gonna select 6 faces on either, or 3 faces on either side of the ground plane. And I'll just extrude a little bit of an offset, and then just extrude back to make the kind of opening for the vent. So let me grab these edges now to make the opening curved. We'll just use the bevel tool, and I'm actually going to switch off the offset as fraction. This allows you to kind of type in the units that you like. World scale units, I should say. And let me just point snap these, and we'll do a merge so everything's stuck together. And cool, let's duplicate this. And we'll just stick it into place, kind of rough in where the front wheel would go, or the front engine, I should say. And that's looking pretty cool. So let's continue working on this thing. So opening this up again and looking at this in fresh eyes, there's a couple things that I want to address. First thing I'll do is take my left side, which I've grouped all together, and I will do a duplicate special, and I'll do a copy, but I will instance the leaf nodes. What that means is that all the pieces inside this group will be instants on the other side. So let's duplicate special, and let's do -1 in X. And one of the things I noticed was this, let me turn the grid off. This line here in the art is kind of flat, it's not round, so that would indicate to me that this front of the shape here is at an angle. So I'm just going to throw a quick lattice on here and change this to 2, and let's do the lattice point. I can't quite see, so I'm going to turn wireframe on shaded on, and we're just going to, it's in world mode. Sometimes it doesn't work in object mode, so I'm going to just change it to world mode. And now you can see it's a little closer to what the drawing looks like. And let's push this back so it's covered again. And then let's delete history. And let's turn wireframe on shaded off and hide the concept. And now you can see more of what's going on there with those pieces. Anyway, kind of a weird detail in the art, but something that I did notice a discrepancy on. So let's look at these engines. Now, both these engines have this kind of crescent shape cut out of them, and how I'm going to achieve that, actually don't need this right side anymore, but take this cylinder, we'll point snap it to there, to the center. So now if I turn the art back on and I scale in this axis, I can kind of get the right size for what I need here. Just duplicate that piece. That right size. Let's go out to perspective view. So now to get that shape out of here, I'm going to use a Boolean. And since this is our blocking model, we're kind of allowed to be a little dirty with our topology. Basically anything goes to get whatever shape we need. So Maya's Booleans used to not work that well, and they've vastly improved since Maya has incorporated the Booleans from Softimage. So what we're going to do here is select this shape, select the shape we want to cut out, and then we will do difference. And now you can see we're getting that shape that we need. And same here. So it's a little dirty. It's not super great, but it's a quick way of getting the shape that we need. So these engines are kind of like a pill shape with the thrusters on the back and then this square shape on the side. So let's go ahead and create that. To perspective view. I'm going to create it on the larger engine first. Let's do a split on here so we can find the center. And then we'll snap it to this center point. And let's just kind of scale it up till it's about the right size. Let's look at the concept real quick. So it kind of sticks out a bit. It's harder to see this engine, but it sticks out a little bit. Let's go ahead and line this up. Let's line it up with that edge. Yeah, go to wireframe unshaded to help me with this. So we're lined it up with that edge. And let's just extrude this out. And then fine, line it up with the corresponding edge kind of as best we can. Doesn't have to be exact here. And it's actually pretty good. So let's move this back so we don't have anything poking through. And then maybe we could just grab these two faces and move them forward. Split this edge. Control select, deselect it. Cool. So now we got kind of a representation of what this piece is going to be. I'll probably end up cutting a hole out here later. Let's go to my concept cam. So they kind of stick out a little bit, and then actually let's do this. Let's create an instance. Turn this off, change this to instance, duplicate special. So now and let's center the pivot. I think we need to do the same on here. Make sure it's kind of lined up with this. So let's line it up with the same point here. We'll just scale it down. Make that center point so we can actually point snap to here to get that shape there. And we've kind of matched that inner edge, so let's just match that like that. So now any changes we make to this will kind of be mirrored in the front, but we can adjust the back at a later time. So let's just go ahead and grab these, extrude, create a bit of an offset, extrude again by hitting the G key. Let's go look at our concept, see how much bevel we got here. And actually, since these are angled in the concept, let's go ahead and angle them. With this, let's center pivot. Same here. And make sure that they're actually in the center of the circle. Insert, point snap to there. And same here. Insert, point snap to here. When we do the Boolean operation, it resets the pivot to the origin. So I'm going to parent this shape under here and parent this shape under here. And we're going to be rotating this way. So what I want to do is go to first frame, key the rotation, and let's go to something like frame 10. And now if we go to our concept cam, we can kind of freely rotate these to better match what's going on in the drawing. So let me turn wireframe unshaded off, and since I can't really see much with this wireframe here, I'm going to turn off selection highlighting in the show menu. So now you can kind of see what I'm dealing with. So that's about the right angle. It looks like this engine's just quite a bit longer. So let's grab this other one, angle it down. That one looks like it's just angled down, which is fine because it makes sense. It would be the, if it's the rear wheel, then it's really, it doesn't rotate, even though this will end up rotating. So let's go back to our perspective, and we will turn selection highlighting back on. That one's kind of, you have to really remember that you did that, because let's go to object mode, because sometimes you'll do that and you'll be like, why isn't anything selecting? Go to concept cam. So there, that lip really ends here, and for the engine part, which let's just grab these faces. So I selected and then control selected. Let's go back to concept cam and really just drag those out about there. And it looks like there's these extra flaps on top, but we can take care of that later. We're just trying to get the basic massing here. Actually, these ones almost look like they could be the same if they were just rotated. Let's go back to our perspective. So these actually just look a little extreme, and one of the things about modeling like this, let's go ahead and is you're going to have to take artistic license on this sort of thing. So I like the look of that front one, but this back one simply isn't, is just simply too long for me. So if we go back to frame 1 and let's grab both of these, and then if we convert instance to object, now we've killed that instance relationship. So let me duplicate this, and really I want these to look like they're just thicker, and I want kind of the same distance from there to there, and the same distance from there to there as well. So let's do, oh, that's actually pretty close. Let's do this. Doesn't look quite right. So that's kind of something that I actually like. Let's see if I can do this. And let's just quickly create those cube shapes that are on here. Parent this and parent this, and now let's go to our frame 10. So I made a mistake when I did the animation. So we've keyed the selection here, but on frame 10 what we didn't do is auto keyframe toggle. So this needs to be on whenever you make a change to your animation, but it's not a problem. For now, we can just go back to the concept, line it back up, and this one the same deal, and now you see we've created that keyframe. So it's just one of those things you have to pay attention to, and I dropped the ball on that one. I'm sorry. So, but anyway, let's work on these shapes. It's almost like it sticks out. So it's like it sticks out about there. And then we stay down there. That. Let's go to face mode. And let's just move the face in. And then back to perspective view. Grab this back face. Go over to concept cam. And voila. We have the shape we want. So in the back here, a little harder to see what's going on, but it's a lot wider. And then if we take this face and push it in, so let's fix this. Not perfectly centered. Make sure it looks okay in here. Concept cam. So you can't really see, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball this and make sure it kind of matches the aesthetic of the front one. So there's kind of our engines. I go back to frame 1, and let me just go ahead and do this too, just so we don't have any floating pieces. Let's just go ahead and grab this face, extrude it up. Another feature that this concept has is this grill in the front. Go ahead and make this larger. If I go to perspective cam, let's go about there, and let's go about there. So let's go to concept cam, and you can see that because our center line in the concept is off, that this grill is also kind of off. So if I push this edge back, let's just go off this one side here. Push these edges back. Now you can see our face is kind of crashing through here. But that actually might be okay, since this is kind of an open area under this metal. So I'll just match that for now. And then let's actually count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 fins on here, which means we need 7 divisions. Let's see, split. 7 divisions. And I want these to be evenly spaced, so the easiest way I know to do that is to extrude, and then let's mess with the offset. Keep faces together off, and let's just mess with the offset a little bit. It's kind of a good thickness. And now if I shift select everything and delete the rest, we have the makings of a grill here. So we might be a little off on the top and bottom edge. Actually, it looks okay. Let's, for the sake of argument, let's bring this edge back up. And if we just go ahead and extrude this completely, just pull it back, you'll see it's black. And that's because I work with two-sided lighting turned off. If you turn this on, it looks gray again. turn it off, it's turns black. And what this means is the surface normals of these pieces are facing inward instead of outward. If we click on a shape like this and display the surface normals, face normals, you can see these little hairs sticking out. But if we do the same thing on here, they're facing the wrong direction. So what we need to do is go to Mesh Display and reverse. And then now you can see the little normals are facing outward. Just toggle that off. So I actually kind of want this to follow more of the curvature of the front of the car. So let's just take some artistic license and do that. We also have these little fins underneath here. I go to perspective cam on this thing. I might take this, let's actually make it 22.5, which is half of the 40 degrees, 45 degrees, I mean. Let's line it up with this point. Now if we go back to concept cam, back it up a bit, back these edges up, and this as well. Cool. So that's a nice, easy shape to do. So one of the other complicated shapes we're going to need to build later is this motion-based thing. Let's go to Google and type in motion base. Now if I go to images, I'm not sure why it's showing me all these beds, but this is kind of what I'm looking for. So it's this network of shocks that kind of can control the tilt of this piece. So we're just going to kind of rough that in quickly. If we look at the concept again, you can see there's a very rough representation of what that should be in there. When I'm building it, I will refer to something more like this, or even this one. So what this thing is really two triangles that are meeting. So let's go ahead and go to perspective here. Create a cylinder. Scale it up. Let's rotate it this way. We go here. Let's just align this a bit. And let's make it 3. So I want the body side of the car to have this kind of a look. And then this side of this thing, we'll rotate that by 180 to have this sort of a look. So body side, mount about in there. Engine side. Really don't need these centerpieces. No, I'm just going to delete them. And then we'll take these edges here and do the bevel, which of course, as we know, is a chamfer. I like to turn this off. If you use offset instead of fraction, you can actually enter the real world values that you want. So let's do something like 5. And do the same here. Turn this off and set the offset to 5. And now we have these bevels that are the same distance apart. Let's create a cylinder to make our shock. And let's actually change the pivot point on this thing to here. That was bottom point. And we'll snap that again to this edge. So what we're going to want to do is kind of align this a little better. Let's do -90. And then let's just scale it out quite a ways. I could actually scale it out in a couple ways, that way and then this way. And then we're going to want to angle it. And what we're really trying to do is get that center point to align with that point on the triangle. So we really need to do it in both directions. Now, when we actually do the rigged version of this, it's going to have aim constraints, so everything will be mathematically precise. But let's make this shock a little more interesting. Let's do the halfway point, and then let's do like this point. Grab these faces, and we'll just extrude them in for now. So now we have kind of a shock shape. Let's duplicate this. And now we're going to so we got that shape going on. I'm actually going to take this face here, extrude it, and then if we take that extruded face and merge to center, I have this button up here too that does it, we get a nice center point for this object. So now if I take these two, put them in a group, and change the pivot point to this point here, I can duplicate this group and then rotate it around by 120 degrees, which is a third of 360. Shift D, and it will duplicate with the last transform. And now I have my motion base for my wheels. Now if we go to our keyframe, it's not going to look quite right, but it's still a good start. So now what I want to do is grab all that stuff minus the body and throw it into a group. And I could delete these groups, and let's call this just motion base, or I'll call it like front motion base. Center pivot, and let's duplicate it. Actually, let's change the pivot to the actual center point. And then over here. And we're just going to make this thing a little bigger. Let's do 1.25. Just move that back a little bit. And Let's go back to... So if we go back to our concept view, you can see there's a lot more GAC kind of in there, and we'll put a representation of that in there now. Let's go back to switch cam. Let's just create another cylinder. 90. Let's just scale this thing up. Like there. And then just grab this. Kind of just angle it in. So that gives that, it makes it look like there's a little more structure to it. Since we scaled that up a little bit, there's kind of that. Let's put this in the motion-based group. And then this one here. We'll put both of these in our left side group. This one goes in our left side group. And these two also go in our left side group. So, now we're kind of getting somewhere, aren't we? So one of the things that I notice now is that there's a lot of open space on the bottom. And when we look at the concept, you see like these representations of like boxy elements down here, but all of this really needs to be designed. So for now, let's kind of just block out some shapes that can kind of go down there. Let's see, we could start up here by this grill. Just kind of block in this type of a shape. We'll let the motion base hang over just a little bit. And let's just split this edge. Just trying to get like a more interesting shape, really. Yeah, so we'll extrude this one forward. And we can extrude this one back. Let's just duplicate it for now. So we have one on both of our... Let's just cover the grill. And then we'll put a face mode on here. Let's just shoot those out to the wheels, kind of. And then, just to make things more interesting, let's do a lattice on them. And let's just make this kind of an angle. Delete my history. I think I'm going to make this one a little bit larger just to make it a little more distinct. And then we can kind of intersect the shapes and move vertices around. Whoa, I'm frozen. Okay, Maya freezes from time to time. Didn't anybody tell you? Another thing that cars generally have on them is this sort of pan shape under the seats. Just to give more space for the drivers. So let's just do this. And we will trick this thing out. Put these in the center group and put this in the side group. We'll trick these things out a lot later. We really just kind of want a representation of a lot of these shapes. So I think one of the last things we need to do in this concept is this sort of engine shape up here. And I know that the body is kind of blocking this area, but we can actually still block this in. We just have to kind of hide the body. So let's just hide that stuff. And then if we make this cube over here. And let's just keep it very simple. I'm just gonna give this just kind of do this shape, and let's just make some toruses here. Just sort of represent the pipe. They look a little big. That's a little closer. Let's make the section radius like 0.4. Well, that looks a little closer to what I have drawn. Let's go to now for this, let's just delete some faces. We don't really need to go too crazy with this thing. Switch this to world mode. So what I'm going to do then is just to extrude again, just so we cover the shape of these pipes. Throw this in the center. Let me actually harden these edges. It's a nice hard shape. Put this in the center group, and this in the left group. And now if we go to center and show this stuff, so now this is kind of a cool way of seeing all our other parts. If we take the left group and let's duplicate it and do the negative X, you can get a better sense of what all the pieces will look like. But you'll notice that we've lost our animation. So I'm going to actually delete this other side. Grab the group again. Grab the group again. And then if I duplicate special, copy, and duplicate input graft, and then duplicate special, negative scale, you can see that both sides now have the animation. So if I unhide these two body parts, you can kind of see what we're dealing with here. I want to go over some other methods of organizing. Sometimes you'll need to select certain pieces throughout the mesh. Like, for example, if you had bolts everywhere and you wanted to select all of them at once, one of the ways to do it is by naming them properly. And then you can type something in here that will kind of search for the wildcard of bolt. I don't have any bolts in here, so it's not going to work. But another thing I do a lot is assign shaders. So I'll grab these body panels and let's just assign a blend. Let's call this body and make it red. Won't make it like totally red though. It's kind of too bright. I'll just give it this kind of reddish tint. But now, for example, for this piece, we're going to retopologize this, but I can kind of assign this to the body material, and then I'll assign this a new material and call it glass. And I'll just kind of make it darker. And then these would actually get the same body material, these wings, as well as these. Let's just do that. And let's grab these engine parts. Since we have these things parented, these engine parts are, selecting the parent will select all the children. So for now I'll just select their faces, but really we're going to want to not have these sort of parent-children relationships later. So let's say I take all the greebly parts then, which basically everything else. And let's assign them another blend. Let's do the specular color kind of bluish on here. Not as saturated, but let's call this kind of a good way to keep track of these is call them matte. So now we got kind of this loose organization here. If we go into the hypershade, for example, I like to close this thing. Now you can see we have our materials here, and if you right click on these materials, you've selected all the body pieces. The ones that we assigned as an object show up as objects, and the ones that we assigned as faces show up as faces. If I create then a selection set, you could create either a set or a quick select set. Quick select set is usually good enough for me. Let's just call this body panels. Okay. If I go in here and right click and select the set members, you can see I've got that same set going on. This is basically a tool at your disposal. It's not necessary for every model, but I find that if there's something that I have to select over and over again, creating a set is a good way to do it. This is about the level of completion I'm going to expect for this week. So if we hide our model, I want to see your concept art aligned with the grid. I want to see some guide curves that represent at least the complex shapes of your model. And I'd like you to block in the broad strokes of your model. You can see that I haven't modeled every single little detail here. For example, these rearview mirrors. There are certain things that are going to be more efficient to just model once. I'm going to be including this base human with the lesson, and I would like to see him in your scenes as an indicator of scale. If it makes sense for your model, especially if there are some parts that are off axis, I would like to see some animated keyframes that switch between these model parts being on and off axis. I would also like to see some hierarchy organization. I don't care so much about the individual part names because a lot of these are going to be replaced, but I would like to see this center left right structure because we'll be using this throughout the course. Finally, I'd like you to do some shader assignment work. As you can see, I've only done shader assignments to the body paint, the glass, and these greebly parts. And that's really all I'm asking for, but if you want to go nuts and do more, feel free. So that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for watching and have fun with your models.